What's up, folks? How's it going? So I get into little phases where I'll read a bunch about something or watch a bunch of videos on something for a while. And yesterday and today I was doing lots of reading on nuclear weapons and civil defense and stuff. Nuclear weapons and nuclear warfare has always interested me. We'll get to that later. I know I've talked about it before, but I think it's incredibly important while I'll talk about it again. But I was watching civil defense videos, and I found it interesting watching American civil defense videos and then watching the British equivalent of those civil defense videos, the nuclear warfare civil defense videos. Because in the American videos, it's always kind of upbeat. They're serious about it, but they're trying to make it look a little bit happier. And a lot of people would consider that propaganda, which it sort of is. But I think that helps promote the main thing that civil defense was all about, which was getting people to remain calm in the face of unimaginable disaster, which is really the number one thing you have to do in any situation, in any disaster situation, which is remain calm. It seems to be something that's lost on people. Anyway, so the American films are always more upbeat and instilling some hope, because people got to have a little bit of hope, or they're not going to want to work. They're not going to want to do what they have to do. The British equivalents, though, they always start with some kind of like ominous music, like from fucking Phantom of the Opera or some shit, and there'll be some guy, in like a tweed jacket, sitting in the same chair that fucking the Queen gave all her TV addresses on. Either that or everybody in England has the same mantle. He'll come out and he'll be like, if there's a nuclear war, you're gonna die. Pretty much. Something like that. Always very, very dark themes on the British. How did you guys fight the Germans being so depressed, man? I don't know. I love you, though. You guys are great. Anyway, so it's interesting. But watch the American civil defense videos and watch some British civil defense videos and see the differences. You can see, also, if you watch The Day After, which is an American made-for-TV movie sort of thing on nuclear war, and then you look at Threads, which is a BBC movie about nuclear war, and look at the two different ways that the two different directions those movies take. To give you a better idea. I've always been interested in nuclear weapons and nuclear war, particularly because I take a view that opposes the mainstream, even the mainstream amongst our own government, which I find to be strange. The idea that, nuclear weapons are bad, and that we're all going to die because of them, and all this shit, and that we shouldn't have nuclear weapons, and that they're a mistake. And I think that that's bullshit. I think that the idea of mutually assured destruction is the only reason that we fucking lived through the Cold War. In fact, there never would have been a Cold War. It would have been a hot war immediately. I promise you that. If we had not had nuclear weapons, first of all, the war against the Japanese would have gone on for years. I don't think anybody would argue that point. I think that we would have gone to war with the Soviet Union almost immediately. Or that they would have gone to war with us. We would have gone to war. It would have been a third world war, and it would have been devastating in a way that people, I don't think anybody really understands. These weapons have done more for peace than the peace movement. The men building nuclear weapons did more for peace than the hippies protesting the war. And I know that sounds really strange. And people have this, people are scared of nuclear weapons, which is legitimate because they're incredibly dangerous. I don't think they're the most dangerous weapons that we have. I find biological agents to be the most frightening weapon that anyone has at their disposal. I'll take my chances with nuclear war way before I take my chances with an outbreak of smallpox. But people have this fear of nuclear weapons. And this is common of all new weapons. All new weapons. when poison gas was first used in the First World War, people started talking about how it was going to make war impossible, that no one would be able to fight in these conditions, that everyone would be throwing gas at each other, and that it would make war as we knew it obsolete. And it turns out that they were wrong. It turns out that poison gas was not nearly as effective as they thought it was, and they were fucking wrong. People thought similar things about machine guns, that they were going to make people stop fighting. The man who invented the Gatling gun did it because he thought if he could create that he could make the army smaller so that less people had to die of disease, and it didn't go down that way either. When strategic bombing first came into vogue during the Second World War, which was its most extensive use, for a time there, a lot of people really suggested the idea that we would never have to fight on the ground again, that it would all go on in the air, that it would all be through bombing and all that shit, and that we wouldn't need ground troops anymore. They thought this shit. People at a certain point believed for a while that submarines could make surface ships completely useless. All these things turned out to be wrong because people became familiar with these weapons. They learned that they weren't the world ender that people thought they were, and they came to understand how they could be used responsibly and how they could be countered and how everything could be evened out. That same approach, that same transition in thought never really happened with nuclear weapons. They had the same amount of fear, that they've always had. And that's part of what's good about them. That's part of why they were never used. The thing is that we were never as close to nuclear war with the Russians as you might think we were. It was, of course, a constant possibility. But I don't think there was really a legitimate chance that was ever going to happen. Not after, it came close with the Cuban Missile Crisis, but that was at a time when the Russians didn't have the capability to strike us in the way we could strike them. That wouldn't have gone down in a mutually assured destruction sort of way. That's why that almost came to blows, because we could have made moves with nuclear weapons that they wouldn't have been able to counter at the time. After that, the Russians moved up their technology and they were able to counter us. And that's what kept us from killing each other. That's what kept us from going into a real war. And no sane country, no sane person in power is going to initiate a first nuclear strike. It's just not going to happen. There's no benefit for you. The only people who would ever initiate a nuclear war of that kind are people that have nothing to lose, like these Muslims who believe that they're going to paradise, like these Jews who believe that their right to live in some stolen land is worth all of our lives, these North Koreans, I don't want to blame the North Korean people, it's not their fault, but ruled by a man who has been raised to believe that he's a god. These are the people that can't be allowed to have these weapons, because they have nothing to lose. They're playing with stakes that sane people don't play with. That's why these people shouldn't be allowed to have weapons. But the United States and the Soviet Union and now the Russian Federation is never going to initiate a first strike. It's not going to happen. The other general misconception is that somehow if a nuclear bomb is set off somewhere, that's it's over. That everyone's going to fire all their nukes and that they're all going to hit their targets and everyone is going to be incinerated. And that's just not how it's going to go down. And this myth is something that was perpetuated, sadly, by extremely intelligent people like Carl Sagan. He made a famous analogy in a live talk. I don't know if it was before, after, or during the first airing of the film The Day After. He made what has become a famous statement. He compared the concept of mutually assured destruction to two men standing in a room filled with gasoline, one man holding 5,000 matches and another man holding 7,000 matches, and each of them wondering who's more powerful. The thing is that no sane person would ever consider lighting their match. And it's strange to call the people that led the Soviet Union sane, but they didn't want to die. They didn't want to lose their power. They didn't want their country to collapse. And we didn't want to lose our power. We didn't want our country to collapse. But there seems to be this idea that nuclear war means the death of us all. And this is a myth. This is a lie. It has no basis in fact, no basis in history. It's somehow assumed that if the button is pushed, first of all, that all the weapons are going to work, and that's just not true. I promise you that if the Russians were to push the button right now, that a fair number of their missiles would never leave the pad, or would be destroyed on takeoff, never make it. Another fair group of them would probably not detonate. Some of them would miss. Some of them, the ones that got through, might hit unnecessary targets. If we were to push the button, our failure rate probably wouldn't be that high, but it wouldn't be perfect. It wouldn't. It's really, really difficult to destroy the entire planet. And there's this idea has been propagated that somehow throwing a couple of nuclear weapons around is going to destroy the planet. And we've seen just from testing that that's just not true. People miss the point of nuclear weapons. They look at something that's been banned. We used to have our ground-based missile systems used to have the ability to carry, I think, as many as 10, maybe 8 independently targeted warheads. Okay, the missile would go up, out, and then the missiles would split off and they'd target independent cities. Why was this done? Was it done because we really, really wanted to be able to destroy 10 cities at a time, or because we planned on it? No. That was done so that the Russians understood that no matter how good their missile defense was, even one missile getting through was going to devastate them. That's why that was done. That is another reason why we didn't fuck with each other. It's that constant, moving up the ladder, all right? Being able to counter each other. Look at the largest man-made explosion in the history of time was the detonation of Tsar Bomba. It was a Russian nuclear weapon that was detonated somewhere in buttfuck nowhere. The Russians have a lot of that. It was a 100 megaton weapon that was scaled down to about 50 megatons for the purposes of this test. And to give you an idea of the amount of power, when it detonated, it released more energy than all the munitions used in the Second World War combined. All right, it's a massive amount of power. Why did they do that? Did they intend on dropping those on our cities? No. I mean, an airplane had to be specially constructed just to carry the fucking thing to where it needed to go. This wasn't a practical weapon. Well, why was that done? It was done to scare us. The same reason that we put 10 nuclear warheads in each missile. It's not necessary. It's for the purposes of frightening people, to make sure nobody makes the first move, and nobody ever did. I think that we were safer when the Russians and the United States were at each other's throats, frankly. What else? I lost my train of thought. Tactical nuclear weapons. And this is a whole strategy in warfare which has kind of been ripped out of our books. It's not considered acceptable strategy. And part of this comes from people just, whenever they think of nuclear weapons, you think of some unimaginable power. Some huge city-destroying weapon that leaves the ground irradiated for years and turns people into mutants and shit like that. That's not how it works. First of all, not all nuclear weapons are huge. All right, not all nuclear weapons were designed to be huge. In fact, our weapons, while considerably more powerful than the ones used at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, are really not nearly as big as they could be. All right. Tactical nuclear weapons were developed for use, obviously, in a tactical situation, a military situation. You look at something like the Davy Crockett. All right, Davy Crockett is it's a recoilless rifle, fires a nuclear warhead. All right, so I think a maximum yield of 1.5 kilotons, something like that. And the purpose of this was not to destroy cities, because it's just not powerful enough. The purpose of this was to irradiate the ground for about 48 hours to give NATO troops time to respond and to make the area impassable for the Russians. That doesn't permanently irradiate the ground. People live in Hiroshima. People live in Nagasaki, believe it or not. Nuclear weapons do not create automatically this wasteland, this Armageddon shit that people have in their mind. This is not how it works. We've taken this whole tactical, all these options totally out of our hands. Tactical nuclear weapons can be used for anti-aircraft, can be used anti-ship in the form of torpedoes, anti-troops in the form of nuclear landmines, shit like that. And none of these things are going to destroy the planet. And none of these things are not that much more powerful than our regular munitions. The damage that we did to Hiroshima and Nagasaki was not unprecedented. It was not as if no one has ever unleashed this amount of destruction on a city before. We bombed the shit out of Tokyo. The same amount of damage that we did with the nuclear weapons could have been done in one night of firebombing, is what I'm trying to tell you. It was all a psychological effect. All right? But nuclear weapons are not necessarily that much more powerful than anything that we have, than anything that we can do. You don't need nuclear weapons to kill everyone in a city. We've proved that plenty of times over Germany. All I'm asking of people is to be realistic and to understand that the idea of banning nuclear weapons, which people continue to hark on, is similar to people suggesting that we ban the legal possession of firearms. Because banning the legal possession of firearms does not stop the illegal possession of firearms. People who want firearms are going to get firearms. Okay, they're going to get these guns. They're going to kill people with them. People who think that people live in a delusion where they think that taking away legal guns are going to make them safer. That's not true. That just means that the only people who have guns are the people that want to kill people, for sure. And the idea of nuclear weapons are not that hard to build. This shit was done in the 40s, okay? It requires money, yes. It requires access to certain tools, to certain supplies that are difficult to get. But the actual process is not that complicated. Any country that put their mind to it could make a nuclear weapon. Anybody. Even an organization could make a nuclear weapon, a group of people, if they have the right funding. If we don't have nuclear weapons, it's not like the people that really want nuclear weapons for purposes of killing people are going to have changes of heart and decide that they don't need them anymore. And that removing the consequences of using strategic nuclear weapons by banning them from legitimate countries is just going to make the likelihood of them being used by rogue states that much greater. I promise you this. I don't know. I'm just trying to be realistic. I'm trying to make everyone understand that the things that you see in the movies are not necessarily the way things really work. Okay? Movies and film and fiction are exaggerated. Okay? Nuclear weapons do not necessarily mean the end of mankind as we know it. I think that conventional warfare would be much more likely to do something like that. I don't know. I'll talk to you folks later.